welcome back. This story we're going to talk about today is about a woman who was meant to be on this earth. I will tell you what. I'm Reagan Snyder, and this is the story of Alison Botha. Alison Botha was born and raised in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, alongside her brother Neil. After she finished college, she decided she was going to take a break from all the hustle and bustle of adulting and just travel for a few years, enjoy her life before she settled into her hometown and began working as an insurance broker. In 1994, Alison was a 27-year-old single woman, working, hanging out with her friends, just living a normal life, doing 27-year-old woman things. She had a steady job. She had a group of friends that she loved, and she's just doing the thing. But on the night of December 18th, 1994, her life would be completely turned upside down. It started out as a fun night. Alison went down to the beach with some of her friends, and after the beach, they went back to Alison's house. They ate pizza, they played games, they just kind of hung out and had a good time. And as the night wrapped up, all of her friends left, but she told one of her friends, Kim, that she would give her a ride home. And it was late. It was about 1 a.m. And so Alison drops Kim off at her place, and when she got back to her apartment, her normal parking spot was taken, so she had to find somewhere else to park. And she ended up parking alongside the road, not very far from her apartment. And as she went to get out, she remembered she had some clean laundry that she had just done that she needed to bring in. And so she reaches over into her passenger seat to grab this laundry. And as she did that, her driver's side door whips open and she turns to see this man she doesn't know standing there. And it took her brain a moment to process what was happening, but this guy was holding a knife, and he told her that if she didn't move over into the passenger seat, that he would kill her. And so Alison, in a state of shock at seeing this stranger with a knife, does what he tells her to, and she climbs over the console and sits in the passenger seat, and he climbs into the driver's seat and takes off with Alison in tow. He's telling her, I don't want to hurt you. I just want to use your car for about an hour. And he's trying to make small talk with Alison. First of all, small talk's the worst, but with a stranger holding a knife in control of your car that you're riding in? Please. He told her that his name was Clinton, and she's like, okay. She's just going through her head, like, what can I do to get out of this situation? And she considered jumping out of the car, which was moving, but she was just frozen. She was so scared. And so she's like, hey, Clinton, do you think that maybe you could just drop me off here? You can take the car. It's fine. But can you let me out? And he's like, nope, you're coming with me. More small talk. Perfect. He ended up taking her to another part of town where he picked up his friend. And this friend was a guy named Tians Kruger. Once he got in the car, they drove off and they continued to drive, and Alison has no idea where they're going. But as they got further from the city and the more secluded it got, the more Alison was like, oh crap, I am in big, big trouble. Like, she was so scared. She didn't know what was going to happen to her. She didn't know where they were taking her. There's two men now, not just one. The guy with the knife. Now there's his friend. What do you do? So the car finally comes to a stop, and they look at her and they straight up say, we're going to have sex with you. Are you going to fight back? I don't know what kind of question that is, but Alison, who's fearing for her life, is like, no. They're like, great. So they both rape her. And once both of them are done, one of them, I'm not sure which one, starts to suffocate her. Alison finally loses consciousness, and then they pull out the knife and they stabbed her 30 times in the stomach. And for some reason, I guess because they hate women, they specifically focused on damaging her reproductive organs. They finally stopped when they thought she was dead, but then her leg twitched And so they came back at her and they slit her throat 16 times. Can you imagine? 16 times. And Alison had come back into consciousness at some point during this. And she was aware of what was happening, but it just didn't feel real. She couldn't feel the pain, but she knew what was happening. And she knew that it was really happening. It was real. So they finally step away from her. And they're looking down at her, admiring their handiwork. And one of them in his language says, "Do you think she's dead?" And the other one said, "Nobody can survive that." So they hop back in the car and they drive off, leaving Alison for dead. But by some miracle, after being stabbed 30 times in the stomach, slashed 16 times across the throat, Alison was still alive. And she knew that she would not survive much longer. She was going to die that night. And so she wrote the attackers' names in the sand next to her. And under that, she wrote, "I love Mom." But then something switched in her, and she got this sudden urge to fight for her life. And she could see off in the distance through the bushes some headlights. So she realized she wasn't very far off of a road, but getting there was going to be tough. So she lifts herself up, and this is gruesome. So just be forewarned. As she lifted herself up, her head fell back because it was hanging on by a thread because it had been slashed so deeply. And so she's got to hold her head in place so that she can make her way to this road. But as she moved, she felt something kind of heavy coming from her belly. And she looks down and she realizes that her intestines are falling out of her body. And so using one hand to hold her head in place and the other to scoop her intestines up into her body the best she can, she made her way toward the road. And her vision is fading in and out. It's black at the edges, and it's just, it's so bad. But she's determined to make it to that road. So she finally gets there, and she strategically collapsed along the white lines because she knew that would be the best way for her to be spotted because it's dark. And so along that white line on the side of the road, a man named Tion Eilard was visiting Port Elizabeth on vacation, and he spotted something in the headlights. And as he drove closer, he didn't know what it was at first. And as he drove closer, he realizes it's a person laying on the road. So he pulls over and he runs up to find Alison, and she's in terrible shape. He cannot believe what he's seeing. Tion was a veterinary student, which is helpful in a situation like this because he's got some medical knowledge. And so with his limited medical knowledge, he was able to tuck Alison's thyroid back into place, and he went and he called for emergency services. And for some reason, it took him calling four times, and nearly 2 hours for emergency help to get there. And they finally did, and they load her up and they take her to the hospital. And when she got there, she was alive, but barely. She's just barely clinging on to life. The doctors were astonished. They couldn't believe the extent of this girl's injuries. They had never seen anything like it in all their years in medicine. And they just, looking at her, they're like, there's no way she's going to pull through. But she did. And once she was stable enough, authorities came into the hospital to take down her statement about what happened and ask her questions about who would have done this to her. And remarkably, she remembered everything about her attackers. She was able to ID them for the police while she was still in the hospital. The men who were responsible for all of this were dubbed the Ripper Rapists by media. And because Alison was able to identify them, they were arrested quickly. Clinton was actually Franz DeToy, and the other guy used his real name, I guess, Tiens Kruger. And they had a history of violence against women. They both pled guilty to 8 charges, including kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. And in August of 1995, they were both found guilty and they were sentenced to life in prison. However, for some reason, they were both granted parole after serving 28 years. And so Alison, who was hoping she would never, ever have to hear about them being released, is like, what? This is insane. Why are they out? She's scared. She feels like she has to watch her back now. So she's just had to kind of make the best of her situation. She has obviously suffered both emotional and physical scars in a big way. But as part of her healing journey, she started to travel around the world telling her story. She became kind of an inspirational, motivational speaker. She also has a book called I Have Life, Alison's Journey. And there's also a movie about her called Alison. I think one of the coolest parts of this story is despite her attacker's attempt to ruin her reproductive system, Alison was able to go on and have kids. In 2003, which was 9 years after her attack, she gave birth to a little boy she named Daniel. And then 3 years later, she had another little boy named Matthew. And Alison lives her life with positivity. She chooses to not be a victim to what happened to her. She said, quote, "Remind yourself that you do not have to take responsibility for what others do. Life is not a collection of what happens to you, but of how you've responded to what has happened to you." End quote. Alison still lives in Port Elizabeth with her husband and sons, and she has a TikTok. If you're interested in checking out her TikTok, I will link it in the description down below. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much. If you have any questions, comments, opinions, thoughts, story suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Give me a follow and a subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your family about my channel. I'd appreciate it, and I appreciate you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.